I don't mind a long movie if it's done well. Braveheart, Return of the King, The Right Stuff, and others are all movies that go well over the 3-hour mark but don't feel like it. I also don't mind slow burn movies. The Witch, Drive, Heat, The Wailing, and others that take their time but are always interesting and work to keep the audience engaged. The Batman is a 3-hour movie that feels like a 4-hour movie. First off, let me talk a little bit about the story. The city of Gotham is, as always, plagued with violence, and a serial killer calling himself the Riddler has been amassing followers to try to expose the lies and corruption that have been a blight on the city. Batman is relatively new here. It's established he's a vigilante, and up to this point, he's mostly taken on low-level thugs and criminals. He works with Commissioner Gordon, who doesn't have the full backing of the police force, in order to expose the Riddler and stop his crime spree. The movie for me was a mixed bag. There were things I really liked and things that I strongly disliked. I liked that this was a detective story. In the past, in the movies, Batman's detective skills were often reduced to Batman thinks for a minute, consults a gadget, which then provides the information to move the story forward. In this, there was some deducing, interrogating, and going over evidence which pushed the story along. The plot of the movie was a genuine mystery being solved. I enjoyed that it had a film noir vibe to it. This was, at its core, a hard-boiled detective story. The only thing missing was the coffee, cigarettes, and lighting. The cast was stacked. John Turturro, Jeffrey Wright, Colin Farrell, Andy Serkis, Paul Dano, and Zoe Kravitz all delivered very solid performances. I didn't even recognize Farrell as the Penguin. They did an outstanding job with the prosthetic makeup. I liked Pattinson's version of Batman. Size-wise, he wasn't jacked like Bale or Affleck, but he was definitely in shape, and they padded the suit to make him look even more imposing. Definitely a far cry from that twerp Edward. Speaking of Twilight, I was wondering if people were going to be willing to give him a chance, since that's what most people know him from. However, after movies like Good Time, more people have seen his acting skills are far beyond those terrible movies. Also, there was a little nod to Good Time in the movie, with the Good Time grocery store near the beginning. The movie looked good. They didn't cheap out on the locations and sets for the most part. Some scenes were really dark, but I get that they were trying to keep with the dark noir theme. I would have preferred that they play with the shadows more, but if this is the look the director wanted, then fine. The movie felt like an Elseworlds story, which it kinda was. They borrowed a lot from Batman Earth 1, which was a reimagining of Batman's story. His mother was Martha Arkham, rather than Martha Kane, and then later Martha Wayne. There were other elements they borrowed that I won't get into because they spoil some of the story. What didn't I like? Quite a bit. Batman gets knocked around. A lot. I get that he's still sorta Batman in training, but the amount of times he gets knocked down, hit with a pole, shot point blank with a shotgun, it just made him less fearsome and more of a punching bag. This leads into Emo Batman. I know the director molded him after Kurt Cobain, and for me, I think that is quite possibly one of the worst people to mold Batman after. It made him a giant mope most of the time. I'm not saying Batman should be a big cheerful dude. I mean, we saw how awful that interpretation was with Batman and Robin. But more often than not, Batman was acting like old pissy eyes. There were multiple parts where I swear I thought he was going to start crying. Batman doesn't need to be invincible. I'm fine with him having some vulnerabilities. But in this, he came across as wimpy. They also played the Nirvana song Ad Nauseum. We get it. Bruce Wayne is Kurt Cobain, troubled rock star. Ugh. Riddler was a lot like Jigsaw. I know the director wanted this to have a mix of a horror movie in there, and I know that if they had this dark noir world with a guy in a green question mark suit, it wouldn't work. It's just that every time I saw him on camera, I really expected him to ask if we would like to play a game.
Solve this riddle or your head explodes.
Also, they made him out to be a sort of YouTube vlogger conspiracy guy. At one point, he's talking to his followers, and he's all, "Hey guys, it's me." I was looking for his like and subscribe pillows. I laughed towards the end when the Riddler was telling Batman he's not into the physical stuff, but then, oh yeah, all those people you murdered by yourself. Yeah, that checks out. So, this needs to be said. I saw many people who complained a few years ago about Batman vs. Superman being too grimdark. But then the same people praised this movie. This movie was the epitome of grimdark, right down to crying emo Batman. That just baffled me. The same people who complained about Batman killing in Batman vs. Superman were silent on this one. Yeah, when Batman's chasing the Penguin and causes a multi-car pileup where I'm pretty sure everyone around the tanker truck explosion died a horrible death, did Batman go back and try to save some of the people? Nah. When Batman hits the ground after the flight suit scene, it was just an awful effect. It looked like they threw a rubber doll down a hallway. Tremendously fake. The biggest problem I had with the movie was that it was dull. The pacing of the movie was set at glacier speed. It took far too long to get going. The first hour or so, I really struggled. I understand they had a lot that they were trying to set up, but that's no excuse for the overlong establishing shots and general meandering. If you're going to make a 3-hour-long film, you need to grab the audience in the beginning and give them a reason to stay invested in the story. Some things were a little exciting, but once they were past either an action scene or something interesting, like the funeral segment, it just plodded along. I felt the beginning could have been trimmed down and incorporated better into the rest of the film. It's about an hour and 15 minutes into the movie where something finally started happening that piqued my interest. Unfortunately, it was too little too late. I stayed along for the ride, but wasn't nearly as interested as I would have been if they managed to grab me from the get-go. Now, I'm not talking the trick of opening the film with some big action sequence and then doing the 2 weeks earlier and having the rest of the film build up to that point. I'm talking about adjusting the pacing. As I said in the beginning of this, I don't mind long movies or slow burn movies, but the pacing needs to be just right. Not quick cuts or short attention span theater, I dislike those equally. There were too many who gives a shit moments that could have easily been cut. I think with some restructuring and cutting of the more superfluous shots in the film, it would have been much tighter and a more engaging film. I'll give you a good example that won't spoil anything. Towards the end, Batman and Catwoman are riding their motorcycles. Did we really need to see the entire thing? They ride next to each other, then down a road, then another road, then a tunnel, and then they go in different directions and so on. It was padding. There were a lot of scenes like this. Stuff like this slowed the movie to a crawl and made me lose interest. Which is sad because it's not that hard to keep my attention. If the pacing was right, I could easily forgive the other issues, but as it stands, the pacing was the biggest problem, and then the other things just made it worse. I really wanted to like it. I honestly did. I mean, I love Batman, but overall, it was a chore to get through. I know a lot of people loved it, and that's great. If you enjoyed the movie, you should go read the first 2 volumes of Batman Earth 1. I haven't read the third one yet, so I can't vouch for its quality. Overall, the Batman had good intentions, but was crushed by the weight of the pacing. I liked some of director Matt Reeves' previous works, like Cloverfield, and 2 of the Planet of the Apes movies. So I was kind of surprised that I was so mixed on this one. The acting was terrific, the directing was good, and the overall story was interesting, but the whole thing just meandered along. I wanted to be invested in this dark alternate universe Batman, but I just struggled to stick with it. I appreciated it for being something different than the usual superhero flick, and even though I didn't enjoy it, I'd rather there be movies like this that try, as opposed to the vast number of cookie-cutter by-the-books films of every genre. This is a case of where I see what the director was going for, and to a certain degree, he achieved it. However, for me personally, I just didn't like it. I'll probably revisit this a few years down the road, but with how I'm feeling now, I have zero interest in rewatching it again anytime soon.